Welcome to Law Module number 2. I'm Dr. Ron Campbell, and I hope that you are enjoying your introduction to law. When you saw Law Module number 1, you learned about the people in France who successfully invaded England 1,000 years ago and changed the legal system with judges speaking French, and in fact the kings and queens of England speaking French for 300 years. And the people of England, well, they're an occupied country. The invaders from France spoke French, but they were also, besides being called Normans, they were also being called Norsemen, or in fact, 100 years before, they were Vikings. Vikings from Sweden and Norway and Denmark, who were the scourge of Europe around the year 800. You see, they had a wonderful war machine. If you look right here, you'll see a Viking longboat, a terrific piece of military equipment. It was built from oak planks that were layered in a V shape, and each of the planks were attached by steel rivets. Now this longboat, 60, 75 feet long, only drew 4 feet of water. That means it only had to be about this deep, this river, and the longboats could sail right up the rivers of Europe. And that's exactly what they did, looking for gold and looking for loot, and they were the terror of Europe. They sailed all around Europe, into Italy, into Sicily. In fact, they sailed up the rivers of Russia and established the city-state of Muscovy. We know for a fact the Vikings sailed around Africa all the way to India, and in fact they came to the New World, to Vinland. Now, a few decades ago, Hollywood made a terrific movie that if you haven't seen it yet, why, you're missing out. And if you know somebody that has access to Netflix, see if they can get for you the movie that stars Michael Douglas's father, Kirk Douglas, and Jamie Lee Curtis's father, Tony Curtis, and her mother, Janet Leigh. Also starring in the movie The Vikings is Ernest Borgnine. It's a wonderful movie, worth your time to learn about the Vikings. Oh, by the way, what finished off the Vikings? Was it the sword? No. Was it a famine? No. Or disease? The Vikings fell victim to, believe it or not, baptism. Yeah. The leaders of the Vikings became unbelievably Christians. And because they were Christians, why, they had to stop the murder and the rape and all the mayhem. They had to become civilized, become settled. Interesting story about the Vikings who settled in Normandy before they conquered England. But now let's fast forward 1,000 years and talk about today. You know now, because you've read in your law textbook, about the symbol of legal systems. Yeah, this little device right here that measures things. And so, what is measured on the scales of justice? Why, facts. Facts that the plaintiff thinks are important. You know that plaintiffs are people who file a lawsuit. And after the plaintiff puts on their facts, then the defendant has an opportunity to respond and to put on evidence as well. Oh, that's right! What are these important facts called? Relevant evidence. This is what is considered by the jury. And in serious criminal cases and in major civil trials, it's not the judge that makes the decision. Oh no, it's the jury. And right now, you're going to learn about how juries are selected and the obligation of our juries in the courtroom. Listen carefully as you hear a courtroom decision.
In an automobile wreck, is the drunk driver always at fault? That's the question for today. You might be surprised at the result in the courtroom decision in the case of Teresa and the truck. And now the courtroom decision in the case of Teresa and the truck. Teresa had worked a long, hard day. She had skipped her breakfast.
There was so much to do that day that I hardly had time to stop. At lunch I had a salad, but that salad was all I had to eat all day long. After work, I went to a local singles bar and had just a few mixed drinks.
Witnesses said that Teresa had about 5 mixed drinks and some shots, and none of the witnesses could remember her eating anything. Outside, the weather that night had turned nasty. The storm came with terrible driving conditions. Teresa could hardly see to drive. Even people who were sober had a hard time seeing the road that night. The semi-truck driver was having some mechanical trouble. The driver parked his semi-truck on the service road, which was very narrow. Because of the pounding rain, the truck driver did not set out any warning signs or flares. He was just sure that no one would be out driving. Teresa did not see the truck before she slammed into it. Teresa's car was totaled, and she was sent to the hospital. The medical people took a sample of her blood, which is double the legal limit. She was way too drunk to be driving. Teresa's civil case has gone to trial. She is suing the truck driver and his employer for her hospital bills and damage to her car. The attorney for the trucking company said,
"Ladies and gentlemen, the facts are that Teresa was drunk. She had twice the legal limit of alcohol in her bloodstream. She should not collect any money because she should not have been driving at all. She was a menace to everyone."
The decision is now up to you. Would you allow Teresa to get money, yes or no?
It's time for you to make a decision. Who should prevail, Teresa or the truck driver? It's time for you to make a decision and email that decision and your reasons why to me. Email to Ron Campbell, that's RON_CAMP, silent P, BELL, at ncsu.edu. I'm waiting for your decision. So we were talking about civil law. So what is civil law? Well, we need to go back to our days and talking about the Normans, and as we determine the differences between criminal law and civil law. Because you see, all the time when you hear about the law on television, you have people who are confusing just exactly what is involved. And let me share with you a quick example. For instance, after the invasion in Hastings in 1066, a couple of the folks were celebrating in the local tavern, having a little bit of mead. Well, mead, by the way, is honey that's been fermented, and they were a little bit tipsy. Well, the serving wench was slow in bringing them the mead. So one of the guys who had too much to drink kind of swatted her on the derriere to get her to hurry up. Well, it was slippery, and the serving wench slipped and fell and hit her head, and by golly, it killed her. So, what happens in 1066 if you accidentally kill a woman? Well, it's not an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. The answer is nothing happens because it's just a woman. All right? Now, what happens if the two king's men, one of them had killed the serving wench, let's assume they were really drinking, and one of them had gone and pulled out his sword and whacked off the right arm of the other soldier of the king, whacked off the arm from the elbow down. What happens to this soldier? Well, you won't believe it, but that is mayhem. And when you damage the property of the king, the justice is swift. For you see, they would have taken the person who damaged the king's soldier, the king's property. They would have put this soldier right on the saddle of a horse with a rope around the neck, tied to a real strong oak tree, and slapped that horse on the rump. And the soldier who maimed the other soldier would be dangling in the air. That's king's law. So let's take a look at who are involved. Who are the people involved in criminal law? Well, we know it's the king versus a person. All right? Now, today we don't have kings. We've got the state, and the state cannot come to court all the time. So representing the state, we have the district attorney, also known as the DA. Or in federal court, it could be the federal attorney. But this is, in fact, the prosecutor versus a person. That's in criminal law. Now, in civil law, who are the parties who are in court? Well, it's one person versus another person. Or it could be a company versus a company. Now, if you win in civil law, what does a person win? Well, do you have to go to prison if you violate a contract? No, not really. It's civil law. What you lose when you lose in the civil law is money. Now, on the criminal side, what happens to you? Well, you go to prison for a long time. If you're waiting till they have room in prison, you might go to jail. And in this course, we want to use our words precisely. What's the difference between a jail and a prison? Well, the answer is jail is where Andy Griffith and Deputy Barney have people waiting a while before trial. After trial, they go to prison. So in this course, when you mean jail, say jail. When you mean prison, say prison. Okay? So let's find out how you win and prevail in all these lawsuits. We know that in criminal, you're going to lose your liberty, or you might lose your head. So how do we decide who is actually going to prevail? Both sides of law use the scales of justice to determine. You see, on the scales of justice, we have here on the criminal side one scale, and on the civil side a second scale. What goes on these scales? Yeah, that's right. We know that it's evidence. Evidence that's relevant to the question that's involved. The plaintiff puts on evidence, and then the defendant. How much evidence does the plaintiff have to prevail? The answer is just a little bit more. 50% of the evidence will tip the scales on the side of the plaintiff. Now, over here on the criminal side, how much evidence is going to be involved? Well, we make the burden be on the king or the burden be on the state to come up with a lot of evidence. Now, if you're accused of a crime, you're a person involved, the defendant. How much evidence do you have to prove you are not guilty, that you are an innocent person? How much evidence do you have to put on the scales of justice? And the answer is very clear, folks. In our Constitution, you have to put on 0. You put on 0 evidence. The burden is all on the king to put on the amount of evidence that's appropriate. And in the evidence that's involved, you of course know, because you've seen this all your whole life on television, how much evidence is? Oh, beyond a shadow of a doubt, right? Shadow of a doubt. Okay? That's what you know from TV law. And folks, it is dead wrong. There is no such thing as shadow of a doubt. You will not pass this course if you use that term in front of Dr. Campbell. Because the real burden is a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt. That's not 100% of the evidence, but it's closer to maybe 90%. Coming up soon will be module number 3. And in law module number 3, you're going to learn where law comes from. I look forward to having you with us and joining us for law module 3. And before I say goodbye, I want to say thank you, Larry Evans, for producing this module and all of the rest of the modules here on the Delta Studios on the campus of North Carolina State University.